The moment a woman I had never seen before pressed a folded paper into my hand across the counter at Tim Hortons and whispered, "Read this when your daughter is not watching." I understood that the life I thought I was living had been someone else's plan all along. It was a Tuesday in late November, the kind of day Ontario does without apology, flat sky, the color of old pewter. The parking lot already salted white even though it was barely afternoon. I had been coming to that particular Tim Hortons on Division Street every Tuesday since my husband died, because it was the one place in Kingston where nobody knew me well enough to offer condolences. I ordered the same dark roast. I sat at the same corner table by the window. I watched strangers walk in from the cold and thought about nothing, which was the closest thing to peace I had managed in 8 months. My daughter Claire and her husband Derek had driven me that day. They did that sometimes now, appeared at my door with smiles that arrived slightly before their eyes, insisting I should not be driving alone in winter. They were at the counter ordering when the woman appeared beside my table. She was perhaps 40, wearing a navy peacoat with a broken button, her hair tucked under a wool hat pulled too low. She did not sit. She leaned forward just enough to set the folded paper beneath my coffee cup, her eyes moving once toward Claire and Derek at the counter and then back to mine. "Read this when your daughter is not watching," she said, barely above a breath. "Please." Then she turned and walked out the door before I could form a single word. And by the time I turned back toward the counter, Claire was already carrying our tray, her smile arriving ahead of her the way it always did. "Who were you talking to?" she asked. "No one," I said. A woman who thought she recognized me. She set down the tray, glanced at the door, and said nothing. But Derek, following behind her, let his eyes rest on the door a half-second too long. I did not touch the paper while they were there. I held my coffee with both hands and listened to Derek describe a property assessment he had arranged on my behalf, without asking, as a courtesy, he said, just to understand where things stood financially. I smiled the way I had been smiling since Robert died, not warmly, not coldly, just enough to fill the space where a response was expected. I folded the paper into my coat pocket and did not think about it again until they dropped me off at the house and their car disappeared around the bend in the road. Inside, I locked the door and sat at the kitchen table in my coat. The paper contained 11 words in handwriting I did not recognize. "Your husband left something in the workshop. Do not tell anyone." I sat with those words for a long time. Robert's workshop had been locked since July. I had walked past it every day for 4 months and told myself I was not ready. The truth was that the workshop was the last place that still smelled like him, cedar shavings, and linseed oil, and the particular brand of hand soap he bought at Canadian Tire. And I was afraid that opening the door would be the last act of losing him. Now I had another reason not to open it, and a reason I could not explain to anyone. I waited until it was fully dark. Then I found the spare key in the ceramic bowl by the back door, the one shaped like a maple leaf that Robert's mother had brought back from a trip to Ottawa years before he was born, and I walked across the frozen yard to the workshop. The cold inside was the same as the cold outside, but different in the way enclosed spaces are denser, more specific. I turned on the overhead light. His workbench sat exactly as he had left it. Tools hung on their outlines, penciled onto the pegboard with the careful precision of a man who believed everything had a place. A half-finished cabinet sat against the far wall, joints fitted but not yet glued. I did not know what I was looking for. I moved slowly around the perimeter, running my hand along shelves without knowing what I was feeling for. Behind a row of paint cans in the corner, pushed flat against the wall, I found a padded envelope sealed with 2 strips of electrical tape. My name was written on the front in Robert's handwriting. My hands were too cold to work properly. I brought the envelope inside and sat at the kitchen table under the light and opened it with the scissors from the knife block. Inside was a USB drive in a small Ziploc bag and a folded letter. The letter was 3 pages, written front and back, and the handwriting grew smaller as it went, as if he had been running out of both space and time. Dorothy, if you are reading this, then what I was afraid of has already started. I need you to understand something before you read another word. I loved you for 38 years, and I would not leave you alone in this if I had any other choice. I set the letter face down on the table and pressed both hands flat on top of it. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the road, and its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling. I was not ready for what came next. But I had run out of the kind of time that lets you decide when you are ready. I picked the letter back up. Robert wrote that he had been suspicious of Derek for nearly 2 years. It had begun the way most betrayals do, quietly, without a clear moment you could point to. Derek had started asking questions about the property that went beyond ordinary curiosity. How many acres exactly? Had Robert ever had a geological survey done? Was there a formal easement registered on the county portion at the back? Robert had answered each question without thinking much of it, but after the 4th or 5th conversation, he had begun to keep notes. What he found, after months of following the paper trail as carefully as he could without letting on that he was doing so, was that Derek had already approached 2 development companies under a numbered corporation registered in his own name. The property behind our house, 43 acres of mixed forest and cleared land, that Robert's father had registered as a family trust decades ago, sat directly in the path of a proposed transit corridor that the province had been quietly planning for 3 years. Derek had somehow learned about the corridor before it became public. The land, once expropriated or sold voluntarily, would be worth several times what any of us had imagined. Robert had taken the information to a real estate lawyer in Ottawa, not Kingston, specifically so that no one locally would learn of it. He had begun the process of having the family trust restructured to ensure that neither Claire nor Derek could dissolve it without a probate court review. He had paid for that work in cash. He had also, and this was the line that made me stop breathing, gone to Derek directly. 3 weeks before the morning Robert drove to his physio appointment in February and never came home, he had confronted his son-in-law. Derek had promised him it was a misunderstanding. He had smiled his careful smile and said that he only wanted to explore options, that he had the family's best interests at heart, that Robert was reading something sinister into something benign. Robert wrote that he had not believed a word of it. He wrote that he had watched Derek's eyes while he said those things and understood then what kind of man his daughter had married. He will move faster now that I have confronted him. I do not know how much time I have to finish what I started. If something happens to me, please do not accept the first explanation. Please look at the road report from the OPP. Please call Margaret Tran at the law firm. Her number is written on the back of the last page. She is the only one who knows where everything is. The coroner had ruled Robert's death a cardiac event. He had been found at the side of Highway 38 early on a Wednesday morning in February, his car against the guardrail. It had been icy. He had a history of mild hypertension. There was no other vehicle. I had accepted that explanation because I had no reason not to, because the alternative was something I could not hold in my mind without it collapsing everything. I turned to the last page. Margaret Tran. A phone number with a 613 area code, and beneath it, 3 words. Wait for midnight. I did not sleep. I sat in the armchair in the living room with the television on and the sound off, watching shapes move across the screen. My phone lay in my lap. At 12, 2 inches the morning, it rang. The number was blocked. Mrs. Callahan, a woman's voice said. Quiet, professional, careful. I am very sorry to call this late. I hoped you would be waiting. I asked who she was. "I am the woman from the coffee shop," she said. "My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that your husband trusted me with something, and I have spent 8 months waiting for the right moment to reach you. I am sorry it took this long. I needed to be sure Derek was not monitoring your communications." I felt the room tilt slightly. "What do you mean, monitoring?" "He had access to your joint accounts until the estate was settled," she said. "He was watching for legal correspondence. Your husband knew this, which is why he kept everything outside the normal channels." She spoke for nearly 20 minutes. She told me that Robert had not been alone in what he discovered. A neighbor 2 properties over, a retired civil engineer named Howard Parrish, who had been watching the land surveys with professional curiosity, had independently noticed the same corporate filings Derek had made. Howard had contacted Robert. Together they had documented nearly 14 months of evidence, satellite images of unauthorized survey activity on the back acreage, corporate registration documents, communications between Derek's numbered company and the development firm, and a timeline that placed several of Derek's movements against dates when covert survey work appeared to have been conducted. "Where is Howard now?" I asked. "He moved to be near his son in Kelowna last spring," she said. "He left his copies with me in case you needed them. He also left a statement." I closed my eyes. Robert had built a wall around me without telling me he was building it. "There is something else," the woman said. "About the accident." I held the phone tighter. "I cannot give you certainty," she said carefully. "I want to be honest with you. What I can tell you is that Howard saw a dark-colored pickup truck on that road early that morning. He was up before dawn because of the cold, and saw it pass twice. He did not think anything of it until after. He reported it to the OPP as part of a general statement, but it was never followed up. I do not know what that means. I only know that your husband was afraid in the weeks before he died, and that Derek had motive, and that the timing was not coincidental." I asked her what I was supposed to do. "Come to my office," she said. "Not with your daughter. Alone. Tomorrow, if you can manage it. I will text you the address from a different number." The call ended. I sat in the dark with the television still moving silently, and I thought about Robert fixing his tools onto their pegboard outlines. His belief that everything had a place. His certainty that if you were careful enough and patient enough, things could be made to hold together even when the pressure against them was enormous. He had been careful. He had been patient. And it had not been enough to save him. But he had made sure it would be enough to protect me. Derek called the next morning at 8:15. He had heard from Claire that I seemed distracted the day before, he said. Just checking in, making sure I was eating properly, sleeping enough, managing the house. He used the word managing the way people use it when they mean surviving, and behind that word I could hear everything Robert had written on those 3 pages. I told him I was fine. I told him I had slept well. I told him I appreciated the call. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the yard for a long time. The workshop door was closed. The yard was white and still. I thought about the 43 acres behind the tree line that Robert's father had set aside 40 years ago, and I thought about the transit corridor, and I thought about a dark pickup truck on a highway at 5 in the morning in February. The legal office was in a building on Princess Street that I had driven past 100 times without ever noticing. Margaret Tran was perhaps 50, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a directness about her that I found immediately steadying. She shook my hand at the door and brought me into a small office with a window overlooking the street. "Your husband first contacted me 11 months ago," she said. "He paid his retainer in cash and asked me never to send correspondence to the house. We communicated through a secondary email account he set up for that purpose." She set a folder on the desk between us. Inside was a document I had to read twice before I understood what I was looking at. Robert had restructured the family trust 6 months before he died. He had named me as sole trustee, with an independent estate trustee at the firm as co-signer on any disposition of the land. Neither Claire nor Derek, nor anyone acting as their agent or proxy, could initiate a sale or transfer of the back acreage without a 2/3 approval from a panel of 3 trustees, none of whom they had any relationship with. He had also established a secondary protection under Ontario's Substitute Decisions Act, pre-filing a statement with the Office of the Public Guardian, indicating that any application for power of attorney over my personal or financial affairs should trigger an automatic review. He had done this because he knew Derek's next move, after the land, would be me. He was very thorough, Margaret said, watching me read. He was also realistic. He told me that he might not be able to finish what he intended, and that if that happened, I should be ready to work quickly once you came to me. I looked up from the folder. He knew this could happen to him. He was not certain, she said carefully, but he was prepared for it. I spent 3 hours in that office. By the time I left, I understood the full shape of what Robert had discovered and what Derek had been planning. The transit corridor announcement was expected to come within the next fiscal quarter. Once it was public, the land value would surge, and Derek's numbered corporation with its quietly acquired options would be positioned to broker the sale between our family and the development group, collecting a commission on both sides while effectively controlling the transaction. Robert had stood between that plan and its execution, and then Robert had not been there anymore. What I did not understand yet was how to make it stop. Margaret had an answer for that, too. She had been in contact with a financial crimes investigator at the Ontario Securities Commission who had separately been looking into the development company Derek was working with. The numbered corporation and the option agreements Derek had drafted without our knowledge or consent potentially constituted securities fraud. The investigator needed one thing to move forward: an affidavit from me confirming the timeline, corroborated by Howard Parrish's statement from Kelowna. Once that is filed, Margaret said, the options Derek holds become unenforceable, and his corporation's involvement becomes subject to review. He will know immediately that the game is over. And Claire? I asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That is the part your husband struggled with most, she said. He loved your daughter. He did not believe she knew the full extent of what Derek was doing, but he also could not be certain. I drove home alone on the 401, watching the flat gray fields on either side, thinking about my daughter. I thought about the look that had been on Claire's face more and more often in the past year. Not cruelty, but a kind of tight preoccupation, as though she were managing something large and complicated that she could not discuss. I thought about whether that look was guilt, or whether it was the particular expression of someone who has learned to live beside a person who is capable of things she has chosen not to examine too closely. I did not know. I still do not know. That uncertainty was the thing that cost the most, more than the fear, more than the sleeplessness, more than the grief that had already been running underneath everything since February. 3 days later, Claire came to the house alone. Derek was in Toronto for a meeting, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Mom," she said, after a long time, "I need to ask you something." I waited. "Have you talked to anyone? About the property? About the trust?" I kept my hands still in my lap. "What kind of anyone?" "A lawyer," she said. "Derek thinks you may have been contacted by someone who is trying to take advantage of you. He is worried. He wants to help you sort things out before you make any decisions." "I have not made any decisions," I said. "He has heard things," she said, "through people he knows in the development community. That someone has been asking questions about our property on your behalf." I looked at my daughter. I looked at the tightness around her eyes and the way she was holding her mug with both hands, and I felt a kind of sorrow that had no particular shape. Not anger, not betrayal exactly, but the specific sadness of watching someone you love stand in the wrong place, for reasons you can almost understand. "Who told Derek about the development community?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the transit corridor announcement has not been made public. I mean that the only people who would know to describe it that way are people who have been involved in conversations about it. Private conversations." Claire's face changed. Not dramatically, not the way faces change in films. Just a small shift around the eyes, a barely perceptible pulling inward. The way a person looks when they realize a door they thought was closed has been open all along. "Mom, I know about the numbered corporation," I said. "I know about the option agreements. I know about the surveys he had done on the back acreage without our knowledge. And I know that your father confronted him about it 3 weeks before he died." The kitchen was very quiet. "That is not," she began and then stopped. "I also know," I said carefully, "that your father loved you very much, and that he took considerable care in what he put in motion so that you would not be implicated in the parts you did not know about." She was crying before I finished the sentence, not loudly, but steadily, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere below the surface, where things have been held for too long. I did not comfort her immediately. I let the silence hold for a moment, because some truths need to be sat with before they can be absorbed. "He always knew how to protect people," I said finally, "even when they did not ask him to." Claire spent 4 hours at my kitchen table that afternoon. She told me what she knew and what she had chosen not to look at directly, and I listened without interrupting, because Margaret had advised me to let her speak completely before I said anything that could be used or misconstrued. Afterward, I called Margaret from the bedroom while Claire sat in the kitchen with her tea gone cold, and I told her what Claire had said. "This is actually helpful," Margaret said. "If she cooperates, it simplifies things considerably." Derek did not call that evening. He called the next morning, early, and when I answered, his voice had lost the careful warmth it usually carried. "I understand you have been meeting with a lawyer," he said. "I have," I said. "I want you to understand that anything you have been told about the property or about me has been deliberately misleading. There are people who prey on widows in vulnerable situations, Dorothy. I am trying to protect you. You arranged unauthorized surveys on land held in a family trust," I said. "You registered a corporation without disclosing your conflict of interest to either Robert or me. You knew about a public infrastructure project before it was announced, through channels that are currently under regulatory review, and my husband confronted you about it 26 days before his car went off the road on a clear section of Highway 38 that he had driven 300 times. The line was very quiet. I would like you to not contact me again without going through my lawyer," I said. "Her name is Margaret Tran. I will have her office send you the details." I ended the call before he could speak. That was the part I had not expected, the steadiness of my own voice. I had expected fear, or at least the tremor of it. Instead, there was something that felt almost like calm, the kind that arrives not because danger has passed, but because you have finally stopped pretending it does not exist. The next 6 weeks were not peaceful. They were full of lawyers and documents, and a meeting at a government office in Toronto that lasted nearly an entire day, during which an investigator asked me the same questions 11 different ways, and I answered each one the same way, because the truth does not require variation. Howard Parrish sent his signed statement from Kelowna by registered courier. Margaret filed the affidavit. The option agreements Derek had drafted were referred to the OSC Enforcement Division. Claire retained her own lawyer and cooperated with the investigation. I do not know everything she told them. I know that she told the truth about what she knew and when she knew it. because Margaret told me the investigators were satisfied with her cooperation, and because I know my daughter well enough to recognize when she is done holding something she should have put down a long time ago. Derek did not tell the truth. He retained an expensive lawyer and issued 3 separate statements, each of which contradicted parts of the previous one. I did not follow the details closely. Margaret kept me informed of what I needed to know. The transit corridor was announced in February, 13 months after Robert died. By that point, the trust protections Robert had established were fully in place, and no transaction could be initiated without the independent trustee review. A development company approached Margaret's office within 2 weeks of the announcement with a legitimate offer. Margaret reviewed it, presented it to the trustee panel, and the process moved through proper channels, documented and transparent at every step. I did not sell the back acreage, not then. I needed a year before I could make that decision with clarity rather than urgency. I walked those 43 acres every Saturday morning through that spring and into summer. I walked the tree line where the survey stakes had been planted without our knowledge, and I pulled them up myself and stacked them in a pile beside the path. I walked the clearing where Robert used to split wood on cold mornings, and I stood there long enough each time to feel him in the quality of the silence. I walked the ridge at the back where you can see the lake when the leaves are down, and I thought about what it means to hold something, not because it is valuable, but because it is yours. The criminal investigation into Derek's activities is still ongoing. I do not think about it often. That work belongs to other people now, people whose job it is to follow the paper trail and determine what can be proven and what can only be suspected. My part was to show them where to look. Claire and I had dinner together last month for the first time in almost a year. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where she had cried into her cold tea, and neither of us spoke about Derek or the property or any of it for the first hour. We talked about her garden and the price of groceries and a film she had seen. Small things. The kind of things that families talk about when they are testing the structure of something they are not sure will hold. Before she left, she stopped at the door and said, without turning around, "I think about him every day." I said I did too. She nodded, still facing the door. He would have found a way to forgive me. I said that she was probably right about that. I said it because it was true, and because there is a difference between forgiving someone and pretending that what happened did not shape what comes next. I was not ready to make that distinction out loud yet, but I was working toward it. Robert's letter ended with 2 sentences that I have read so many times now the paper has softened at the folds. He wrote, "I am sorry I could not be there to walk you through this, but you are the most capable person I have ever known, and the only thing I have ever been more certain of than that is how much I have loved you. I keep the letter in the ceramic bowl by the back door, the one shaped like a maple leaf. It is the right place for things that need to be close at hand. What I know now, at 63, in a house that is mine in a way it has never quite been before, is that strength does not feel the way people describe it. It does not feel like courage or resolution, or any of the words used in tributes at retirement parties. It feels like getting up from the kitchen table after reading something that has changed the shape of everything, and walking across a frozen yard in the dark to open a door you have been afraid to open, and trusting that whatever is waiting inside is something you are capable of carrying. Robert knew I could carry it. He had known for 38 years. I am beginning to believe he was right.